Welcome to the red carpet about the history of Hornell.
You'll be seeing 6 videos.
The first 2 are about the early history of Hornell and the railroads.
The next ones are about the Great Hornell Fair, early aviators and women's rights, Shattuck House, and baseball in Hornell.
We hope you enjoy it, and thank you to the Spotlight Theater for hosting our video.
Please be respectful and pick up your garbage.
History of Hornell.
Wyoming Massacre. The Wyoming Massacre of 1788 was the cause of the settlements coming into being. Fugitives from this bloody Indian attack, searching for a safer haven, came up the Chemung and Coocton rivers to Newton, Elmira.
Just outside of Elmira, Newtown, and it was that is where General Sullivan's troops defeated the British and the Indians to finally avenge the loss. But they had many battles, and as they marched up the Chemung Valley, they also came through the Canisteo Valley here, the Finger Lakes region, and a lot of the soldiers that were in General Sullivan's army liked what they saw. You know, the deep valleys and nice hills, a lot of land that could be easily tilled and farmed. So the after the war, there was two men that was called Oliver Phelps and Nathaniel Gorham. So these two guys decided that they were going to try to get this land settled and get possession of it. There was one problem. This land where we are now was part of the state of Massachusetts. Yeah, believe it. You have to drive almost 6 hours now to get into the state of Massachusetts. But we were part of the state of Massachusetts, or the colony of Massachusetts at the time. So they, after the Revolutionary War, they went and petitioned, it was called the Phelps-Gorham Agreement, and they petitioned the state of Massachusetts to release 2,600,000 acres, 2,600,000 acres of land in upstate New York, which consisted of this area right here.
Canisteo Valley. Some remained there, others pushed west to the valley of the Canisteo. There in 1789, Uriah Stephens and Benjamin Crosby erected a large log cabin in which they spent the winter with their families. The following spring, Benjamin Crosby pushed farther north and erected the first dwelling in what is now Hornell. He built his log cabin on the site of the old St. James Mercy Hospital.
Upon reaching the historic locality of Painted Post, the party journeyed up the Coocton River for several miles, but not finding the land suited to their desires, they returned and next proceeded up the Canisteo River to present the town of Hornellsville, then included the township of Canisteo.
The lands here were exactly what they had been seeking, and so they decided to purchase the land and make a permanent settlement. Phillips and Garnham land purchased. Coleman, Bennett, and Brown were named to visit Oliver Phillips and Canandaigua and purchased from his large tract to townships. The new owners immediately after their purchase proceeded to draw lots for the land. George Hornell coming to Hornell. Hornell had originally visited this region in the capacity of trader among the Indians, and thus became acquainted with the locality in which he permanently settled in 1790.
June 9th, 1793, John Stevens, who drew great lot number 7, conveyed this lot containing 1,600 acres to George Hornell for a consideration of £111.
Yeoman Benjamin Crosby purchased from Solomon Bennett, gentleman, great lot no. 8 for 311 pounds. Both Crosby and Hornell's tracks connected 1,600 acres of land and laying in part at least within the present city limits.
We talk about Benjamin Crosby, who was the first settler here in Hornell. They used to call Hornell Upper Canisteo. He was the first settler. He still has descendants that live in our community.
An anecdote used to be told of old Mr. Crosby buying venison of the Indians. It was said that the Indians came to the old man one day and offered him meat of a fine elk. The old man, not being much of a hunter and being just then in want of meat, greedily struck a bargain for the elk, being highly delighted with its trade. The next day he missed a fine cow, which after a long search could nowhere be found. After a while, a redskin, who could not keep the joke, as it esteemed him no longer, said to the old man, "Ugh, he ate him long ago. You know that elk?"
It was learned that the land purchased by the party did not cover Canisteo's flats, as was supposed to. For the township, number 3, Canisteo, and 4, Hornellsville, covered the desired section. So in 1790, the land was switched to what they thought they had bought.
Judge Hornell built the first mill on the site afterward occupied by the Thatcher Mill, being the first grist mill of West Elmira except the Bennett Mills at Canisteo. Hornellsville then boosted up a crack military company owning a 6-pound cannon which was kept in the gun's house. That it was an important popular institution is testified by the fact that men came 20 and 30 miles to train it.
1800. George Hornell erected the first tavern here and almost immediately became the most popular man in the area. He was associated with many measures which aided the public rather than himself. Hence the honors that were afterward bestowed upon him were worthily deserved. The town, the village, and the present city of Hornellsville have been successfully named in his honor. How Hornell got its name.
The town of Hornellsville received its name from the popularity of Judge George Hornell, one of the early settlers. He was a man of stalwart body and mind and was much appreciated by the citizens.
In late 1790, Crosby became the first permanent European settler in the present-day Hornell. You know where St. James Hospital is now on Canisteo Street? That's where Benjamin Crosby actually lived. And at that time, there was this was a wild territory. You're talking 1790. It hadn't really been settled. The Erie Canal was about 60-some years in the future. In the 1840s and the 1800s. So there was nothing. There was no transportation. It was wild. There was just old turnpikes. So he settled down there by St. James Hospital, and he made a friend with an Indian who lived up here by the Seneca Street, right up here by the Seneca Street Bridge. As you go over, walk to the high school, there was an Indian that lived there. Well, Benjamin Crosby wanted to make friends, so he invited this Indian who lived there down for dinner. And he served a 3-course dinner. He had a soup and an appetizer and an entree, a 3-course. So the Indian was so impressed with the 3-course dinner, he invited Mr. Crosby, Benjamin Crosby, up to his residence, and he served a 3-course dinner. All 3 courses consisted of succotash, and succotash is a mixture of 3 different beans, and that's part of history.
The meteor shower of 1883. The people of Hornellsville reacted to the remarkable meteor shower on the night of November 12 to 13. when it seemed to many frightened people that the stars were falling out of the sky.
Pike Road. In 1809, the Turnpike Road from Ithaca to Olean was opened, thus giving an impetus to local growth. A road in those days was built with saws and axes. Enough trees were cut down to permit the passage of a wagon. A turnpike was wider. It permitted one wagon to pass another.
Main Street was part of the turnpike built by the state and opened for traffic in 1809. During the 1830s, it was a toll road with toll gates east and west of the village.
The first school. The first school was established by Judge Hornell about the year 1810. It was taught by Miss Sarah Thatcher in a block house, then standing near the residence of Deacon Maury Thatcher, a brother of Miss Thatcher.
Underground Railroad. But the most famous station on the Underground Railroad in the Hornellsville area involved the Thatcher family. The station was probably
Old Davenport at the age of 21 with a single wagon load of goods. He drove 300 miles to the little backwoods village of Hornell. Built and scoured his own hands and commenced the sale of merchandise brought with him.
on June 9, 1793, John Stevens
Remained in business at Hornellsville, engaging in all the businesses, enterprises of the times until 1848. While in life, he was known as enterprising and successful businessman. He moved to Bath.
Post office. When the office first was set up, here it was known as Canisteo. This was on March 20th, 1813, and George Hornell was the first postmaster. He was followed in the office by his son-in-law, Ira Davenport, in 1819.
So Martin Asset bought the business and the store from his uncle, and it grew, and in 1848 he expanded to offer the community its first bank. So that was pretty cool. And then back then they used to have the bank of Hornellsville Bank. They used to have their own tender letter, so it's just like a banknote for money. And we have a couple of those in the collection too, so if you ever come across some funny money, well, it's really funny, but it's Hornell. It's part of all small communities. They issue their own funds.
Town of Hornellsville. The town of Hornellsville was formed from can of steel April 1st, 1820. The ville would be dropped in 1905. At that time, the newly named town consisted of 26 dwellings scattered along the turnpike, today's Main Street, an improved road leading from Ithaca to Olean, and on Broad Street, today's Broadway Mall.
Then we have Union Park, which was right out front of the school, which is a bone of contention to the majority of occupants of Hornell, where they sliced and segmented Hornell with the highway, 4-lane highway, and took out our Union Park.
Can you tell them some of the things that were in Union Park?
Well, I do. I do know it was gorgeous. It was Major Reynolds donated the land to Hornell for the community park. And when it first started, they didn't take care of it. It was just like a dumping ground for lawn waste. And it looked terrible. So one night, so they call them, do they call them wags? They were just young men that would just had a little bit of mischief in them. And they made up mock tombstones and they put them on the refuge piles and said, "This here lies," and they said the mayor of Hornell or the councilman from Hornell. "Here lies due to lack of funds. Here lies whatever for not doing anything right." You know, and they put these tombstones all over the lawn refuge in Union Park. And that prompted the city officials to clean up Union Park, put in walkways, put in flower beds, and ultimately they bought a beautiful sculpture and fountain from New York City and set that in the center of the Union Park. They had benches, they had cannons. It was the center of Hornell.
In February 1888, the bill was signed by Governor Hill, making Hornellsville a city.
A lot of people came to Hornell. First started with the building of the railroad. Started with the Irish. In the 1840s, when they started building the railroad, the next wave of immigrants was the late 1800s, early 1900s, which were Italian immigrants. And they came and they worked on the railroad. And then the next...
When pioneer Benjamin Crosby and his immediate followers came into the Upper Canisteo country, they little thought the lands on which they settled would ever become the site of a prosperous village, and much less a thriving metropolitan city.
The coming of the railroad to Hornellsville 130 years ago was the one big factor responsible for the growth of the entire area, including all towns and villages, some of them not on the Erie Railway line.
Traffic that had flowed along the turnpike from Ithaca to Olean, which began in 1809, slowed, and river traffic, except for lumber rafting, had almost disappeared. Residents of the southern tier began talking about railroads in 1831, and benefits of such a faculty were stressed.
In April of 1832, an act was approved in Albany, characterizing a firm to construct the New York and Erie Railroad.
4 years later, the New York and Erie began to grade a section of roadway at Almond and Ackerton's, when it first surveyed. The grade was never used.
At the time of the first survey, it was planned that this division of the railroad would terminate at Almond and the necessary shops would be located there, in Almond.
Land was even purchased. Work was suspended for several years, and the company reorganized, and it was decided to make the line terminal at Hornellsville.
The population of Hornell and Almond were about equal at that time, but Hornellsville began to grow rapidly after their terminal was established. One by one, industries which had located in Almond moved to what now is Hornell.
They built the railroad, and when the railroad was completed in 1851, it came just above New York City and went all the way across the bottom of New York. At that time, it was the second longest railroad in the world. The only one that was longer was the railroad between Leningrad, well, now it's St. Petersburg, and Moscow. And I actually have ridden on that. But this was the second longest one. And the people in Dunkirk were all excited because you got Lake Erie here, of course. And they thought that they were going to get all this business. But Dunkirk tried to stop it, but a branch was built from Hornell up to Buffalo. And when that happened, and they also built another branch down here that went into Pennsylvania and all the way over to Chicago. So Hornell was at the break point right here. Buffalo, Chicago. Hornell was right. And because of that, trains would come up here carrying cars, some to go to Buffalo, some to go to Chicago or Meadville or the places down here. So Hornell had a huge yard, and they would put the trains together and take them apart. And they had little switch engines to do that.
1830s, land was being surveyed and considered.
The Erie Railroad really is what got Hornell started. The tracks reached Hornell in 1851. I don't remember quite that far back, but they did. And my great-grandfather came over from Ireland, and he got a job with the Erie Railroad. His son, my grandfather, worked on the railroad, and my grandmother did too. Both of them used that telegraph key there. That's how they sent messages back and forth. Instead of using voice, they did it by code. Like a letter A was a dot and a dash, B was a dash and 3 dots, E was a single dot, T was a single dash, and that's how they talked back and forth. 3 of my great uncles worked on the railroad, my uncle worked on the railroad, my father worked on the railroad, and I worked on the railroad.
Remember way back I said something about the Erie, or New York Lake Erie Western was the widest railroad? That's because it used a 6-foot gauge. Between the rails was 6 feet. Standard gauge is 4 feet 8, and believe it or not, 1/2 inch. Somebody said that the width of a horse's behind when it used to fit between the rails of a buggy. Somebody said that the width of a horse was really a Roman chariot. I don't know. But anyway, the Erie was 4 or 6 feet wide, and that caused problems because when they get to some place where they had to exchange cars with another railroad, they couldn't do it. So they had to change cargo from one car, wide gauge, to one car, standard gauge, 4 feet 8 inches. This didn't work out too good, so the railroad finally decided one day we're going to change the gauge from wide to standard. They placed tools and men every so often, and when the signal was given within 10 hours, the whole railroad was standard gauge, just like that, bam.
1841, construction of the railroad lines began in this area.
1843, the population was 300 people. Only roadway, Main, Seneca, and Canisteo streets had been developed with houses and stores.
By virtue of its geographical position, and Hornell was destined to become the most important point on the Erie system between New York and Chicago. It was practically 1/3 of the way from New York to its western terminus. It was to become the end of 3 divisions of the road, the Susquehanna, Allegheny, and Buffalo divisions. It was necessary to have great yards located here to facilitate the flow of the freight and passengers. It was also necessary to establish here immense shops for repair and maintenance of the rolling stock.
1850, population 300 to 700, 100 houses, 2 churches, 2 schools, a hotel, and 1 store.
1850, the first Erie locomotive came into Hornellsville, and Orange number 4 having won a 20-mile race against a stagecoach.
May 14, 1851, the Erie Railroad comes to Hornellsville. The first passenger train to travel the entire length of the Erie from Piermonton, Hudson to Dunkirk arrived in Hornellsville, with the President of the U.S. Millard Fillmore and the Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, on board. Webster was on a rocking chair on a flatbed.
November 26, 1851, Hornellsville Weekly Tribune has first published by Edwin Ho. It started because there had not been any representation from Hornell at the railroad May 14th, and the big city newspaper left out Hornell.
1865, population of Hornellsville was 5,338.
So what I have here is I have Polish bonds, and I'll show them to you. So this one is a Republic of Poland $100 bond. And what happened was in Hornell, a lot of immigrants worked for the railroad. And my great-grandfather, Frank Cardamone, actually had one of them living with him. And what they would do is when they would make their money from the railroad, they would in turn invest in these bonds, because $100 of this went back to Poland. So they thought that while they were in the U.S., they would help out their homeland and buy these bonds. So they bought these bonds, and then on the inside there are little tags, and each tag has a date and a month attached to it. And each month they could take this back to the bank and get that exact dollar amount. So this was a $100 bond that they bought for $100, and then this one is the 53rd installment of this. So on October of 1946, they could get $2.50. And then on October of 1947, they can get another $2.50. That does not seem like a lot of money, but that probably could have helped them through the month buy groceries, maybe even pay for rent. So $2.50 went a long way back then.
How would that help with rent?
$100 back then was probably like, $1,000 or $10,000 now. So they paid $100 for this, and after the 75th installment, it all added up to a little over $168. So it's about 6% return on their $100 investment. And the guy that my grandfather had staying with him, he actually was hit by a train and killed. And these were passed down. My grandpa didn't cash them in. My great-grandpa didn't cash them in and then handed them down to his son. And then my grandfather tried to contact the National City Bank of New York, which is now Citibank, and I know we've all heard of Citibank. So that's turned into Citibank. They actually have
Courier and Ives. The scene is of the old Hornell station where passengers got off the train to eat. The profusion of commercial lettering on the cars and locomotive is uncommon for Courier and Ives, who usually kept the sales messages subdued.
The unusual thing about it was my grandmother took over the Cameron Mills station. There's a little picture of it there. That's the Cameron Mills station. My grandmother, and we only knew of one other woman in the country, a lady in New Mexico, who was who operated a station. The railroad was a man's world. During the war, some women got jobs. They had a woman here in Hornell that would grease the wheels and so on. But my grandmother, as a station agent, was really unusual.
1877, the Erie Railroad employed 800 people. Erie shop employees worked 12 hours a day for wages as low as 10 cents an hour.
Did you ever hear of the Ice House?
Yes. You have it down in our notes. We take notes.
Okay. When the Ice House used to service refrigerator cars. Our refrigerator cars were insulated box cars, which had ice bunkers in them, and the men down at the Ice House would pour ice into the top of those cars to keep products, produce, meat, whatever, from spoiling. When the Ice House burned down, it was just about the same time as mechanical refrigerators come in. A little diesel motor made electric, or made the air conditioning, which kept everything cool. But at one time, the Erie Railroad had a reputation for getting the produce, like cherries, from Chicago to New York in the shortest time. They had a good reputation.
1880, population 8,195.
This is where the museum is now, okay? But that was the ticket office, the baggage room, the express room. Upstairs was where the train dispatchers were, the superintendent's office. Downstairs were yard master, car inspectors, office workers like train masters, road foreman of engines. It was just busy, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All the time it was busy.
1880, a new brick Erie Railroad depot was built in Hornellsville after the original depot burned. 1849, the first Erie shop or shed was built in 1849. It was enlarged in 1850 to accommodate the 3 engines and machinery for repairing the same. It was burned in 1856. The ground was broken for new shops and engine house, and the foundation laid in 1854. The old shops being too small, the building was completed in 1856 and was dedicated by Grand Ball September 4th, 1856. The Erie shops at Hornellsville cover 6 acres of ground, including 2 roundhouses. The latter will accommodate 42 engines. The car shops employ 50 men. The machine shops and roundhouses employ 172 men. Besides, there are 120 engineers and firemen on the Western Division of the Erie Road and 300 engineers and firemen on the Buffalo Division. The answer is that ice cream in one of the most delicious forms originated not far from Rochester, for pie a la mode was launched in 1842 in Hornell. One of the many stories this corner had heard and read about the favorite way to eat pie stems from the Old Erie restaurant once located in Erie Railroad Depot in Hornellsville years before the city dropped the bill in 1906. The local angle, most reputed to be true, is the one where the traveler hurriedly alighted from a waiting passenger train and ordered a dish of ice cream and pie. The waitress, according to the story, accidentally dropped the ice cream atop the pie, and the diner told her he'd eat it that ways because he was in a hurry to get back aboard the train. That's one story. Here's another passed along. Claims a former Erie Railroad magazine story noted that Pie La Mode got its start in a Loder Street restaurant in what was then Hornellsville. The story has it that the restaurant ran out of heavy cream with which to make whipped cream, and that the manager of the put ice cream on the pie.
1891, Hornellsville had grown to contain 3 large hotels, 4 banks, 5 silk mills, a planing mill and sash factory, flour mill, a tannery, 2 fence and cable factories, a fairground with horse racing park, a shoe factory, and an opera house.
1900, population of city of Hornellsville was 14,000.
1948, the Erie Railroad switched from steam to diesel locomotives. The diesel engines required much less maintenance, meaning that hundreds of men working in the Hornell repair shop were eventually laid off. These layoffs worked the beginning of the railroad's demise in Hornell.
So when I was your age, a little younger, they were making a switchover. The freight trains were being pulled by the steam engines still, but the passenger trains, which had a lot less smoke and stuff, were driven by gasoline, diesel fuel. They were carrying the passenger trains.
1950, population of Hornell, 15,000. December 31st, 1969, Erie-Lackawanna Railroad passenger service was discontinued. The expansion of this was train number 5 and 6, which ran until January 4th, 1970 for the holiday travel.
All right, so the depot was in full swing. We had passenger trains up until 1969, and the service was stopped. And then there was more people laid off because you need baggage handlers, ticket sellers, trainmen, and all those folks that took care of it. There's one Russian lady that used to peddle ice through the cars, to replace the ice in the cars. And of course the shops, well, when the steam locomotives left in 1952 or 54, the shops were downgraded because they only had to take care of diesels. The diesels were easy to take care of. All it needed was fuel and light maintenance unless they broke something. Steam locomotives are very, very work intensive, so a lot of guys got laid off there and they had to go find work elsewhere. By now the population had lost about 1,000 people. It's down to 1950. In 1960, the Erie Railroad merged with the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. Remember I mentioned them before?
Yeah.
And those folks got together and they took up some of the railroad here and they took up some of the railroad there. A lot of men got laid off, or lost their jobs, or had to move, so the population went out, dropped a little more. In 76, Erie-Lackawanna merged with 5 other railroads in the Northeast, which were having financial trouble, and it became Conrail. That was when you had the big blue locomotives running back and forth. Remember Conrail? Some of you be too young. That cost a few more jobs because things moved out of here, like the accounting bureau went to Scranton and the shops went to Marion, things like that. So Hornell was having a hard time. The eastbound fast freight yard, which was, between Cass Street and, East Avenue and McGee Road and Castile. That was the fast freight yard, and over on the other side was the Woodruff yard. That was the westbound yard. I had a yard master over here, and you had a yard master over there. You had callers over here. You had clerks over there. You had clerks over there. You had people make.
1990, population of Hornell, 9,500. The Great Hornell Fair, 1860 through 1929.
The first agricultural society was known as the Hornellsville Agricultural Society, of which the late Maury Thatcher was the first president. The first fair was held in year 1856 in a barn which was in the midst of an orchard of large apple trees, and to the trees in the orchard was tied the horses and cattle which laid claim to the best blood the country afforded.
Well, so when it started, I think it was more like a farmer's club.
Oh yeah, I read about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was livestock, and it was showing of livestock and promoting farming, equipment, agriculture, seeding, and etc. So it was all agricultural. And then it grew. And it grew into several different venues. It was the Farmers Club, the Hornell Agricultural Society, and then ultimately it was the Great Hornell Fair. It had several different areas that it was located. Originally, I think, don't you think it was in what do you call it?
High school. Yeah, it was by the high school. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, Union Park. Mm-hmm. So first in Union Park, so it must have been very small, and it must not have had a lot of livestock, because even though it was a big park, it wasn't meant for livestock, even back then, because I don't believe at that time, oh yes, there was a fountain there at that time. They had at the other end of Hornell, right where the high school is now, they had the Babcock racetrack. So he had races and dog races and etc., but mostly horse racing there. And then you can also drive. So they needed some place to take their carriages and horses and just a nice little drive around town. Way back when. Very mild driving, leisure driving. So they used that as the first fair, that area. So the Joneses, driving park. And then it grew to become the Farmers Club and then the Great Hornell Fair.
In 1856, the Hornellsville Agriculture Society was established and began sponsoring the Hornellsville annual fairs, which continued to grow and become a highlight in the area. Located with what is now the Hornell High School in Spurtsfield.
And you know where the high school is, and you know there's a grandstand across from it?
Yeah.
You know, there's a field, the football field, the track? Okay, well, this grandstand was what was there then. It was a bit bigger, and it was wooden, and eventually it burned down, but it was big, and they had a track. The high school wasn't there, so they had that whole area to put up stuff, okay? Because they had exhibitions. They had, like the Bath Fair, you got animals and stuff. Okay, they had horses and cows and sheep, all kinds of stuff. They had all kinds of products like that we grow, farm crops and stuff. And my grandfather, who was the head of the fair, he was called the secretary of the fair.
The fair had lots of acts like horse and dog races, acrobats, and aerial performers, and livestock competitions. In 1888, they offered a $3,000 purse for the winner of a horse.
Site of the first dog show in USA, 1885.
That's true. The 7 acrobatic wonders of the world.
The Melvin brothers, at the time America's most sensational gymnasts and equilibrists, did flips, somersaults, and seemingly impossible tricks. They performed dangerous and difficult stunts to thrill their audience.
People would come from all of western New York, Rochester, Buffalo, Olean, the whole place would come. And they literally had thousands and thousands of people. And if you take a look at this, you can get an idea of what the people look like and whatever. And some of the other things they had, you can see in the middle is a blimp. You know what a blimp is? They had blimp rides. You could get on and go for a blimp ride. I mean, they had everything. They had acrobatic planes come by. They did all kinds of stuff.
Ferris wheel.
Hornell native Jay Conderman built the first Ferris wheel for the Great Hornell Fair in 1893.
First wheel was the first to be constructed in this section of the country. The Hornellsville crew would take the wheels all over the country for demonstration, and they became very popular with the viewers.
But it was a Ferris wheel made in Hornell. And it was made, I believe, right there on the T of Maple Street and Seneca Street. Yes. And right back there, right where almost where Steuben Trust is right now. There was a Conderman garage there and a Conderman building there. And they
Wheel on the road in 1899 and proudly announced in his ad and billboard that his wheel was the largest on the road.
However, he ran ads offering new and used Conderman wheels. It is not known whether these new wheels were remainders of production in the Hornell plant or built somewhere else. We do know that Conderman maintained business ties to Hornell and moved back to his hometown in about 1927.
There was a carriage manufacturer here up on Seneca Street, right there in front of Steuben Trust. It was called Coddington's. They started building Ferris wheels and merry-go-rounds. And they ended up building, a horseless carriage, or a carriage with Condiments. It was Condiments' car. A number of years ago, I rode in a parade in an electric car that was built in 1898 here in Hornell by the Conderman brothers, and it ran on batteries. Someone found that car in a barn and rehabbed it, and it was a carriage. It had like a stick driving, and it had stick driving and a little brake and accelerator, but it ran on batteries.
Leaving the Ferris wheel business as his main interest, Jay Conderman moved to Chicago, where he became a successful real estate broker.
Conderman wheels apparently ended when the plant on Seneca Street was destroyed by fire. Jay Conderman died on August 9, 1929, and was buried in Hornell's Rural Cemetery. A few Conderman wheels survived the death of their designer in 1929 and continued to operate at carnivals and county fair, but eventually they were replaced with newer wheels.
Livestock and horse races.
Yeah, they had trotters, which are the horse. I don't think they had horse races with the people in the saddle, but you know what the trotter is? It's where they have the horse and the guys in a cage behind it, and they go around. They had those. Yeah, they had a lot of those. They had those kind of races and stuff. Yep. Oh, yeah.
Livestock exhibits. The fair held free attractions. The chief attraction at the Great Hornell Fair for several years had been the livestock exhibits. The livestock exhibits had included a sheep exhibit, a horse exhibit, cattle exhibit, and there were about 2,000 birds of 100 different varieties. The grandstand.
Well, they would, the grandstands were huge, even high, almost as high or higher than the ones we have right now at Maple City. And they were full of bystanders who all came out to the fair because we didn't have television, We didn't have a lot of entertainment, no movie theaters. This was their entertainment. This was their social aspects, going to a fair like this. They had incredible acrobatic feats with no netting. There was poles put up, and they would walk across the wires with no netting. Yes, they would jump off a ledge into a, and then they had small animal X around in the base of these. So it was a big draw.
In 1909, a new grandstand that seated nearly 1,800 was built for $8,500 after the old one burned in 1908. The flames were first reported at 2:04 p.m. In the 2 hours, firemen poured approximately 50,000 gallons of water, 417 gallons per minute.
In 1888, a 3,000 post was given to the winner of the horse race.
Ruth Law landed at the fairgrounds during her record-breaking flight.
There was also a special exhibition of horsemanship by a detachment of 11 state troopers.
Mr. Ostrander entered a prized cow, then sold it for $3,200 during the fair.
The mayor of Hornell had contacted Clyde Schultz, my grandfather, and said, okay, we're going to start charging fees and sales tax and stuff, which they hadn't done before. And Clyde said, no. We've been here 25, 26 years. It's never happened. We're not going to do it. We're not going to pay you to do that. We bring in a ton of business for the city because all these people that are here come from far and wide, and some of them have got to go to stores, some goes to, a restaurant or cafe or what have you. And Mayor said, no, we're going to do it. So Clyde said, okay, that's it. There's no more fair. And it closed up. That was it. They never had it after that.
Financial. April 20th to April 23rd, 1929 were the last days the fair was open.
The fair closed due to lack of finances. The Great Hornell Fair was still missed 22 years after the fair closed.
Early aviators and women's rights leaders. Ruth Law was a pioneer American aviatrix during the 1910s.
On November 19, 1916, at 2:07 p.m. on a cold, windy day, Ruth Bancroft Law landed in the little village of Hornell on a Curtiss plane.
Ruth Law was a daring air pilot that flew from Chicago, Illinois to New York City.
She had other goals within this. She meant to get to New York City that same day, but we have to do a visual on this if we can just use our imagination. Here is a woman who is in a small plane. She tried to buy a bigger plane, but Mr. Curtis would not sell it to a woman. He didn't feel she had any right to be in the big planes. He was also, in his defense, he was also very involved in building airplanes for the war. So he said no to Miss Law, and she had to use her old airplane. And they reinforced it. They did as much as they could. They put a little shield up in front of her because of her little pusher. The gas tank was back here. She was sitting right here, and then she had a little shield right here where her feet were. And then she had the rudder and the control on both of sticks in front of her. So she had to constantly keep her hands on these sticks. Without that, the plane would lose, she would lose control of the plane very easily. So any time, okay, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So she did a Curtiss pusher. They put in additional gas tanks in the back. Then let's talk about that she was going to be in the air for 6 hours. Warm, high, cold. It was November, much less anything else. And she was a woman. So women back then had to wear skirts. So in order to get ready for this flight, she slept outside in a tent on the Morrison Hotel in Chicago prior to her flight time. And she slept out there to condition her body for the cold. In readying herself, she had 2 layers of wool, 2 layers of leather, a woolen cat helmet, leather helmet, and goggles. She had to have her hands on the controls at all times. If you took your hand off the controls and anything happened, the wind of gusts came and you would lose control of your airplane, it would be a great percentage of death. It's so easy to lose control of a small airplane like that. So she had to have her hands on the controls at all time. She devised a little scrolling map. She did where she wanted to go to. She put it on a scroll and she put it on a little apparatus and she hooked it on her leg. So in order to scroll further on her map, she had to put her knee up and hold the control and do it very fast and scroll more to see where she was going next. She had to be low enough to see the landscape, to know where she was going, but high enough to get the draft well. She had to do the higher altitude in order to get the flight she needed with the gasoline she had. So she said that 10 miles out of Hornell, she ran out of gas. But then she would tilt her plane a little bit and get a little bit more in the carburetor, and that kept her going a little bit further. 2 miles out of Hornell, she completely ran out of gas. So this is not a glider. This is an airplane. This is a woman. It's 1916, and she is out of gas in the air over Hornell. She glided into Hornell. She came in low. People were amazed. They were all on the outlook for her along her flight. They knew her flight. They were saying, "There's Ruth Law." So her airplane was a big happening in Hornell at that time. Everyone was at the Hornell, Great Hornell Fair, which is where we have the high school right now. And she came in really low, and she landed successfully, and she couldn't get out of her airplane. But why wouldn't she get out of her airplane right away? She'd been in the cold for 6 hours with the tension of holding her sticks like this, her control sticks. She had a very difficult time limbering up. Somebody had to assist her out of the airplane. So when she first stood, what I love about history is I love photographs. So this is Hornell in 1916 right here. So this is her getting out. She's pretty well covered. And this is, she had people on the ground. They knew she was going to land in Hornell to gas up. And they assisted her out of her airplane, they gassed up her airplane, and then she went to a local hotel, which I have never been able to find out where, for a little bit of to warm up and have a little bit to eat. And then she got right back onto her airplane. Oh, but she had to take her skirt out. I forget that? There's a very important part. She had a little skirt, well, not a little skirt, a skirt tucked behind her seat, because a woman in 1916 didn't walk around in pants. So she had to put a skirt over her outfit.
She stopped to refill for oil in Hornell. Her first words were, "My, but it is cold up there."
She circled over the entire city and landed at the Hornell Fairground, the current Hornell High School.
Well, set a record with her flight of 661 miles and with a total of 5 hours and 41 minutes in the air from Chicago to Hornell, New York. Glenn Stewart Scott pioneered American air traffic during the 1910s.
Blanche Stewart Scott learned to fly at the Glenn Curtiss Expedition Company. She took lessons August and September of 1910 and took to the air in Hammondsport, New York.
She was the first and only woman to receive instruction from Curtiss to prevent her aircraft from gaining enough speed to become airborne while taxiing on her own. Curtiss inserted a block of wood behind the throttle pedal. However, something happened on September 2, and Scott managed to fly to an altitude of 12 meters, 40 feet in the air. She continued her lesson and made her debut as a member of the Curtiss team at the Chicago meet on October 1-9, 1910.
October 23, 1910, she made her first public flight at the first professional appearance of a woman aviator in the country at Fort Wayne, IN.
1916, she hung up her small leather aviator's hat and goggles after surviving a number of violent plane crashes and several crash landings. So what was her connection to Hornell? In the 1940s, she became the Hornell radio station WARC's program director. She had a popular radio show, Rambling with Roberta.
The Hearst Prize. Publisher William Randolph Hart had offered a $50,000 purse to the first venture to fly across the coast in 30 days or less.
Cal Rogers enlisted an Armour Meatpacking Company as a sponsor promising to promote a new soft drink, Vin Fizz.
He purchased a Wright Model X biplane, called it Vin Fizz, and on September 17, 1911, took off from Sheepshead Bay on Long Island, New York.
Almost from day one, he had problems. He had many crashes and problems along his way across the U.S.
Hornell connection? Flying from Elmira, where he struck some telegraph wires just as he lifted off, and settled abruptly back to Earth. The damage was not serious, but it delayed his departure for 6 hours. The rest of the day wasn't much better. The spark plug that had popped out 2 days earlier again worked loose, and Cal had to hold it in with one hand and fly the plane with the other. He finally gave up and landed at Hornell at 3:47 p.m. When he touched down, his left skid snagged something. The plane slewed violently, throwing Cal out of his seat and smashing the left wing. Rogers was not hurt.
Anna and her husband, Charles Wellington Edds, president of Steuben Trust, dedicated a room in the Hornell Public Library in memory of their son, David Cadogan Edds. That room became the children's room. Edds' family were strong supporters of the Hornell Library.
Applying for fun, fame, and fortune, Calvert P. Rogers, one of the most daring birdmen the world has yet known, passed over Hornell yesterday, flying on his great flight from coast to coast, with the white wings of the big biplane shimmering in the sunshine like a great bird. The aircraft lifted majestically from the place where it had been forced descent the previous day, darting out over the village Cancio, circling about twice. The young Avatar tilted his elevator until the aircraft attained a height of 2,030 feet. Then straight up the valley he came, and at last the famous Avatar was over the city of Hornell. Probably every man, woman, and child not confined to bed jail-jammed the streets, the rooftops, and the neighboring hills Saturday afternoon when Rogers first approached the city. "There he comes," came the shout from the people on top of the buildings. Evening Tribute Time, September 25, 1911.
Women's rights leaders and Hornell.
Women's liberation, Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony had a debate with the Hornellsville attorney Horace Bevis. She came from Rochester and was going to a debate about women's suffrage. They had the debate at the Metropolitan Hall in Hornell, New York on May 19, 1870.
Among the most controversial lectures was that of Susan B. Anthony on May 19, 1870 on the topic Work Wages and the Ballot. She debated the questions of women's suffrage with a prominent Hornellsville attorney, Horace Bevis. One account reads, one position was maintained by vehement and stubborn assertions and was met with well-stated arguments and witty repartee. It is quite safe to say that the cause of universal suffrage was not advanced by this debate. The Evening Tribune reported that Anthony based her only argument, if it can be dignified as such, upon the one fact that the ballot constitutes a power and that woman to obtain her rights equal with man must be put in possession of that power. She did not tell us whether it would elevate or degrade the moral standard of women, and her whole talk was devoted to prove that pecuniary results flow from her endowing her with the elector franchise. The Tribune also offered the speculation on women's suffrage. If throwing a firebrand upon the hearthstone of every household, breeding dissensions, between heads of family, arraying the husband against wife, daughter against parent, brother against sister, and setting whole neighborhoods by the ears of overexcited political questions, leading the mothers of well-regulated families to abandon household affairs, and servants to follow in their wake to mingle in that strife, to elect or near their neighbors, will elevate the refinement of ladies, then we say give her the ballot. The Tribune did not endorse universal suffrage, particularly not when tendered fresh from the lips of a smart-talking woman in the shape of the Second Temptation.
Mrs. June Lord Pound.
On June 1873, she gave a lecture at the Metropolitan Hall in Hornell, New York. She had been engaged to deliver the address for that year before in the Athenaeum Society of Alfred University. At the last moment, the faculty of the Sea of Learning dared not risk the effect of the choice of the ladies of his society upon her arrival here of the dilemma the society was in. And at the suggestion of the committee, consented to deliver her address at the Metropolitan Hall in Hornellsville that evening. Notice was hastily given to the public, and a good-sized audience greeted her. Our people with those from the university and its locality who had the temerity and courage to attend went away convinced that Hornellsville had been favored by what the university missed.
Anna Laura Godot-Linetz lived her adult life in Hornellsville. She also fought for women's suffrage and all rights. But, said Mrs. Hatch, called Mrs. Gilman, the nation that shall first recognize the sonship of their mother shall lead the world.
She was very involved with the world, and she was well educated. She had gone to normal school, which was not all that uncommon. That just meant that she could be a teacher. Then she went on to Alfred University and got a degree in writing. Then she went on to the University of Michigan. And I'm not sure what kind of degree she got there. I just know that she did that.
Anna Atsu wrote a newspaper column, Suffrage Notes and Comments, which was unheard of back then, about women's suffrage, which appeared in 40 newspapers from 1912 to 1917.
She started
an open air market, which would be like today's farmers market, to improve the nutrition and health of people.
Anna Etz was one of the founders of the children's home in Hornell for orphans.
She was known for being a suffragette, and she wrote from 1914 to 1917 in 40 different newspapers carried her articles about women's suffrage. She was really such an advocate for all people and trying to make children's lives better, women's lives better, and if the men's lives were better, she felt that it would reach the women and their children.
In 1896, she was elected for school board and won. In 1897, Anna Etz served on the Board of Education.
And she started a club for women to raise them up for education and wages and just make their lives better and make them understand that they really were equal to men and they had a lot to offer the world.
Following World War I, she thought Americanization and adult education programs.
Anna Etz also ran a club in Greenwood to make women feel good about themselves.
Anna and her husband, Charles Wellington Etz, president of Steuben Trust, dedicated a room in the Hornell Public Library in memory of their son, David Kettigan Etz. That room became the children's room. The Etz family were strong supporters of the Hornell Library.
Shattuck Opera House.
The Opera House featured operettas, musicals, vaudeville, plays, and speakers.
Productions ran from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on their popularity.
The house was also used for balls, local talent shows, and conventions. When there were no stage productions, movies were shown.
Dr. Shattuck was born May 27, 1829 in Brantsport and came here to practice medicine, dentistry in October 1851.
The Shattuck was located roughly where the empty lot is by Texas Cafe on Broadway.
There used to be a dollar store there. In fact, according to Hornell Mayor Sean Hogan and City Public Works Superintendent Dave Oakes, son of the late and current city historians, what is now the Dollar General store was the first floor of the Shattuck Opera House. There was a place to eat there too. Advertisement for if you want a good warm meal.
The Shattuck Opera House was erected in 1871 by Dr. Sewell E. Shattuck. The cornerstone was laid July 4th, 1871 by the Masons and the Odd Fellows. It was located at 13 through 21 Broadway.
The building was 100 feet long, 60 feet deep, and 43 feet high, with 4 stories, including attic. The stage was 60 by 39 feet.
The Opera House, built by Dr. Sewell, was the first concrete structure to be built in this section of the country.
A grand opening was held on August 21st, 1873, but the house was open for inspection 2 weeks before the grand opening.
The grand opening featured Was Dora by Alfred Lloyd Tennyson and Charles Reed and was presented by the Mute Brothers, proprietors and managers of the Academy of Music, Buffalo. At first, seats price ranged from $1 to $5.
It was the place where everything happened in Hornell. People would come on the train from all over, and one of the stops was in Hornell, along with, I think, Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse.
Many famous stars and notable productions appeared here.
Babe Ruth performed at the Shattuck House. Ruth explained why New York Yankees lost World Series.
Babe Ruth. Sosa Band. Lillian Russell. Eva Tunde. Jancy Olcott.
Houdini. General Tom Thumb and his wife.
Strong boy John L. Sullivan challenged for the heavyweight champion.
Kate Smith. Jack Betty.
I don't know if any of you remember the Murray Stevens building or the Murray Stevens clothing store in Hornell, but that was my husband's uncle, Uncle Murray Stevens. And the story has it that he used to ride the train. He was part of the vaudeville act, and he was a dancer. And he would ride the train from New York City up to Hornell and then go the circuit, and one of the stops, of course, was at the Shattuck Opera House. And that's apparently where he met Helen, his soon-to-be wife. And one of the times he was up here, he never got back on the train. He decided to stay here, and he married Helen Damrath, who then they had a family together and they settled here. And he owned and operated Murray Stevens clothing store. He toured around with the Marx Brothers, and as sometimes as witty and off color as they might be, he said they were really true gentlemen off the stage. He said they didn't make them any nicer than they were.
Cole Rostow, it comes to Hornell Silva.
Roosevelt here on October 24th, 1914. Theodore Roosevelt, U.S. President, addressed the crowd at the Metropolitan Opera House in Hornell. He spoke in support of the Workmen's Compensation Law, and that's a workman's compensation. If you're hurt on the job, then you have insurance there to pay for your medical benefits and give you a living subsistence. Particularly as it would apply to the railroad town like Hornell. The Evening Tribune account describes the disturbance a group of boys were causing in the gallery. Colonel Roosevelt, because he was a colonel in the Army during the Spanish-American War, Colonel Roosevelt asked him to quit, saying that while he liked the American youth, he did not enjoy a marathon race through the gallery while he was trying to make people hear what he was saying.
Cole Roosevelt, the day was simply magnificent, a bright sun, a beautiful temperature, and all natural smiles and arraignment. Broad Street was crowded and musicals with band entertainment, and by the time the party reached the great opera house, it was packed from pit to dome. Cole Roosevelt was in a happy mood as usual, and as a tremendous ovation, he received contributed to no small degree in his feelings of satisfaction. Cole Roosevelt, probably in his research for unknown rivers and evidently forgotten that his name of the city has been changed, for he addressed the citizens, men and women of Hornellsville. A large proportion of his time was devoted in discuss of the workmen's competition law, evidently knowing the population of the city composed largely of railroad men. The stage machinery was installed by E.D. Carver of Buffalo, and seating capacity of the house was 1,357. The late Charles S. Smith managed the theater for many years.
Fair Week usually brought Chester Devon, Nancy Boyer, the Spooners, and other vaudeville companions.
Frank Lynch, as a youth, began his theatrical career in productions at the Old Shattuck Opera House. A Lynch-never song and dance routine of those days was extremely popular with Hornellians.
The clever young vaudeville star, whose home is in the city, is here for a brief vacation and has consent to produce in the city in sketch which he has won fame and fortune from one country to the other.
Gained fame in music. From the conservatory came a stream of accomplished
musicians to cast in the Shattuck productions.
Helen Lord Hubble, highly successful in the New York theater.
Joseph Sloan of Olive Place became well known as a pianist, composer, and orchestra leader here in New York City.
Hornell was on a theatrical circuit in those days, which included Albany, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and finally New York City. Shows played the circuit in rehearsal and tryouts before being produced in New York. This meant that for $1 or a quarter for a second balcony seat, one could see the famous Nat Goodwin perform, or Eva Tengai attired in tights sing I Don't Care. Van and Skank deadpanned their way to comedy history, and William J. Scallon, the tenor, delighted Irish and non-Irish.
One of the greatest performers was especially dear to Hornellians' hearts. He was Clancy Alcott, who brought some potential tears to the eyes of his audience when he lifted his tenor voice to My Wild Irish Rose.
Olcott, born Chancellor John Olcott, came to Hornell from Buffalo in 1877. He was 18 years old. He was drawn here by his love of horses, which amounted almost to an obsession. William Brainerd of Buffalo, who brought Olcott here, owned a half interest in the Osborne House, a leading hostelry at Loder and Center Streets.
In the days, movies, radios, and television, the performance at Shattuck Opera House provided the bulk community entertainment.
Household sale. Lo and behold, I got in there and I looked at this piano. Oh my goodness, it was a mess. It had chunks taken out of the legs, but it was huge. It was a huge rectangular grand piano. And I talked with the woman and I said, gee, I don't know, this is pretty beat up and I'm going to have to pay to get it fixed and tuned and everything else. And she told me, she says, well, this is the piano out of the old opera house in Hornell, the Shattuck Opera House. Well, that spiked my curiosity a little bit, so we bought it for $300. Well, then I had the problem, it was huge. How am I going to get it to my house? So I had to call Fiamingo. Fiamingo Moving Company was in town at the time. I called them and it was $900 to get the piano moved from Canisteo to Hornell, but it took 4 men to do it. It was solid rosewood, absolutely gorgeous. Elos Pianos. He said, give him a call. Well, no sooner did I get him on the phone, and he started describing my piano to me. And I was like, how do you know what this piano is? He says, I can tell you right now, it was built in Jamestown, New York in the 1860s. Now, you know, that's going back over 100 years. So I said, well, how much do you think it would cost to make this a piece of beauty again? He says, I'll do it for $3,000. And I said, $3,000? He said, sure. And I said, gosh, I got a quote by a gentleman that told me it was going to be $9,000. And he said, oh, I can tell you exactly who that is. And he named the company. And he said to me, he brings all of the pianos, he picks them up and brings them to me. He says, now, he would have charged you the $9,000, and I'd have charged him $3,000, and he'd have made $6,000 on the deal. So I really was lucky that I got in touch with this Mr. Elos himself. Well, when he got it done, he had it several months. He called and he said, it's such a piece of beauty. He said, I've got it in my front window in the store. And he says, people walk by. He says, and I've got it opened right up. He said, people walk by and they just stop to look at it. It's so beautiful. Would you mind?
The Shattuck Opera House stood idle for 10 years. The property descended to Dr. Shattuck's only child, Harriet Shattuck Jacobs Cullen, and was sold by her erectors August 16, 1940 to the Market Basket Corporation for $41,283. This company raised the structure and erection a one-story building on his site.
Gone for 7 decades, the Shattuck has one final legacy. Many residents don't know this, but the alley off Broadway that runs behind the Main Street buildings has a name, Opera House Lane.
The reason isn't clear now. Perhaps it was because of the growing influence of movies and radio, but the Shattuck Keystone to host performance by the early 1930s.
Baseball in Hornell.
Hornell Professional Baseball.
Professional baseball leagues were in Hornell 3 different times.
Documented staffed by paid players, the Hornell Baseball Club.
A letter to the editor in March 25, 1903. An edition of the Evening Tribune changed baseball in Hornell. It was submitted by Ernest Landgraf, a German immigrant who played several years of minor league ball before taking on managerial positions. Dear Sir, I beg to inform you of the fact that your city will once more be represented on the baseball diamond by a fast team. After due consideration, I have decided to locate you in your enterprising city the coming season with a fast professional team. A team will probably be formed to take in Hornellsville, Corning, Elmira, Penyan, and 2 other good towns, he notified.
The trials were held and the first games played in June. Teams from Penyan, Corning, Elmira, Addison, Canisteo, and Hornell would play almost daily throughout the summer. We were almost always at the bottom of the standings.
The minor leagues were a stepping stone for ball players to get to the major leagues, but you had to prove yourself. So you started off way down at the bottom of the ladder, and then you played in what was called the Pony League. That was the rookie league. And then if you were good, they promoted you to the next level. And then if you were good at that level, they promoted you to the next level, and hopefully someday you got to the major leagues.
This league continued through 1906 before disbanding.
Second try at professional baseball.
Hornell was the center point. It was the middle between New York City and Chicago. There were no airplanes in the 40s and 50s. So if you were going to go from New York City to Chicago, you had to take the train. And the baseball teams, they didn't fly on airplanes like they do today. They had to take the railroad. So Hornell was the center point. They had to stop here, and they would change engines and things like that. The people would get off the trains, and some of those players got off the trains back then, and they would play games here in Hornell with some of the local teams. Okay.
1914 to 1915 season. A team with major league affiliations was again located in the city as part of the Interstate League.
Babe Ruth, hero of the World Series, will arrive in Hornell tomorrow morning on the Erie train, number 7. According to the telegram received from him today, the Bambino is starting on a brief barnstorming trip with a picked team, and Hornell will be the first stop. It was in Hornell 2 years ago that the Babe was forced to disappoint hundreds of fans because of rain, and he was anxious to come back. If fair weather prevails tomorrow, the Barnstormers will be greeted by an immense crowd. Most of the stores have already agreed to close, and it's expected that the Erie shops will shut down in time to let the men see the game. The only fly in the ointment just now is the prediction of rain for tomorrow. Babe Ruth will visit Hornell again tomorrow, Tribune, 1923.
Babe Ruth, coming from Warren, PA, arrived here this morning on the 10:30 train and repaired immediately to the Hotel Sherwood. All morning here was a big crowd at the Sherwood waiting to snatch a glimpse of the most famous men in America, and these individuals were not disappointed by the good-natured Ruth. Garbed in the brilliance of a big yellow ulster and cap to match, Ruth was a
unmistakable figure as he entered the Sherwood. Crowds give Babe Ruth great ovation, and Babe grins and says he like this Old Town Tribune, 1923.
There's a story that was printed in the Evening Tribune many years ago about Babe Ruth never hit home runs or knocked the windows out of the old Irving School because, in fact, my grandfather struck Babe Ruth out all 3 times he got up to bat here in Hornell. Back in the old days, in the teens and 20s of the 20th century, major leaguers would barnstorm. After their season was over, the World Series was over, several players would go out and they'd ride the railroads, and Hornell was a big railroad town, and they'd ride the railroads and they'd come through town and they'd bring, there'd be a team of major leaguers, and they'd get together with some of the town teams, the best players that they had at the time in the town, and they'd play against them. Back at that time, Babe Ruth was, the one time he came through, they got rained out. The next year he came through, they didn't get rained out, but he got in trouble. He wasn't supposed to play. They didn't end up playing because he ended up getting suspended and had to pay a fine, and so did all the other players. And then the next year, the third time he came through, was when he was able to actually play, and he came up to bat 3 times, and my grandfather struck him out all 3 times. My grandfather was Don Kelly. He was a left-handed pitcher, and he struck him out, like I said, all 3 times. Now, back at that point, you guys all know how the high school is set up, that campus is set up. Back at that point, you know where the baseball field is and where the scoreboard is. That's where home plate was. Okay, and they used to hit out back towards the old Irving School. The old Irving School is go all the way to the other side of where the softball field is. In the corner of right field, on the corner of where the softball field is where the old Irving School was. So they used to say, it was rumored that he hit a home run and he knocked the windows out on that school. But like I said, that never happened.
Again, the Hornell team landed last almost every year.
Third attempt at professional baseball.
Baseball, minor league baseball at Hornell started in 1942. It went from 1942 to 1948. The Hornell was affiliated with a major league team called the Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay, do you know that? That's a major league team. In 1949, during the transition year, okay, the club was then affiliated with the Boston Red Sox, who were the world champions last year. Okay? In 1950 to 1955, the team then was taken over by the Brooklyn Dodgers. So that's why the teams in Hornell, the college teams are called the Hornell Dodgers. They're associated with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So from 1950 to 1955, the team was associated with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Now in 1956, the Dodgers, they were struggling. So in 1956, the Cincinnati Redlegs took over. And in 1956, that was the last year of professional baseball in Hornell.
1941, the opportunity for professional baseball would arise again. Hornell was promised the team under one condition. The community had to raise $15,000 to equip a team and for a lighting system for Maple City Park so that night games could be played.
When Hornell entered the league, it was classified as a Class D club, along with Bradford, PA, Hamilton, Batavia, Jamestown, Lockport, Wellsville, and Olean. They were managed first by John Polk Wayland.
For the first time in a quarter of a century, they had a team again. The city supported its team. They had a parade, businesses closed, and marching bands played before Mayor Lee Dennison threw out the first pitch.
This time, these teams did a little better. They had winning seasons, but always lost in the first postseason round.
Pony League. 1942 through 1948, the Hornell Club was affiliated with the Pittsburgh Pirates.
1949 transitional year.
1950 through 1955, the team was affiliated with the Brooklyn Dodgers.
I want to share a little story with you in 1956, because now in 1956, I was 11 years old, right? Now you guys are what, 12, 13, 12?
11.
11, okay, so we're same age. Okay, I was the same age as you. But in 1956, it cost 25 cents to get into the ballpark. We didn't have 25 cents. Now you're saying, you've got to be kidding me. I didn't have 25 cents. Unless I had to scrounge it up looking on the sidewalk to find pennies. You know, you kids nowadays, if you see a penny on the sidewalk, would you pick it up? Tell the truth.
No.
Would you? No. In 1956, if we were walking down the street and we saw a penny, the six of us would die for that penny. We would actually go into, you know, the sewers, the gutters.
Ew.
No, wait a minute. All of a sudden you look down and you see something shiny. It was a nickel. Oh my God, we took the lid off to get the nickel. But no, when I say sewer, it was a drain sewer, like water. Okay. It was just a water, like a water drain sewer. We'd go to get that nickel. Okay, that's how relatively poor we were, and everybody was in the same boat. So we didn't have a quarter to get into the ball games. So my friends, let's say we would go to the ballpark, and we would hear the people cheering, but we couldn't get into the ballpark. And oh gosh, we wanted to see that game so bad, but we couldn't get in the ballpark. So my friends and I, they were kind of ingenious, you know. They said, hey, let's go over to the fence. We'll stand on this cement block, and we can look into the stadium. But we couldn't all stand on there because it was only big enough for maybe one or two. All of a sudden, we realized that when they played the national anthem, nobody's attention was on the fence. The police officers who were guarding they were saluting. So we waited until they started playing the national anthem. We'd get up there, and one at a time we'd jump over the fence, and we'd sneak in, and we would get to see the ball game. But that's a little bit of this.
Impressive seasons in 1950, 51, 52, making championship series each year and capturing the title in 1951.
In 1950, attendance was an impressive 97,563. By the time baseball left at the end of 1956, it had fallen off to just 27,281.
1956 was affiliated with Cincinnati Redlegs.
A failed fundraising drive at the end of the year would help spell the beginning of the end of professional baseball in
1963 minor league baseball restricted, eliminating Class D teams and closing the door on Hornell football.
I want to just share with you. Okay, now remember I thought that they left Hornell because I was 11 years old because they didn't like Hornell. But then I finally realized that there was more to this game of baseball than just playing the game. Now, we think of it as a sport, right? Baseball, basketball, football, track, all those different things. They're good for young people to get involved in. But when you get to the professional levels, it then becomes a business. In 1949, where's Hornell? It was 85,000 people went to the ball game. Okay, now look at this. And now here's the last year of professional baseball in Hornell. What's that? 13,000. What year did World War II end?
1945.
1945. Everybody was coming home from the service. Everybody was looking for entertainment. Okay? Was there television in 1945?
No.
How about 46?
No.
How about 47?
No.
How about 48? How about 49? 50. 50 television was in its infancy stage. 51 starting to develop. I didn't have a television set in my house when I was growing up until 1952. So what did you do in the house? What did we do?
Read a book.
Pardon?
Read a book.
You read a book or you listened to the radio. That was a big thing. You listen to the radio. The Lone Ranger. Okay, and you'd listen they would explain the stories on the radio, and boy, you just pay attention. But then all of a sudden the television came up. And the television, 52, 53, 54, 55, now the television set, people were staying home watching television, so they didn't go to the ball games as often.
1994.
The NYS Collegiate Baseball League would receive the Hornell Dodgers with its wooden bat summer league.
Hornell has a great history for baseball. The Hornell Dodgers, which was a farm team, a single A team affiliate of the Brooklyn Dodgers, right up until Brooklyn moved to Los Angeles in '57, after that season in 1957. But they had the Brooklyn Dodgers, where my father was a bat boy for them in 1950 and 51. Preacher Rowe was a pitcher for the ended up being a pitcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers, won the World Series, was one of the guys who won the World Series in 1955, the only World Series that Brooklyn ever won. The Dodgers ever won while they were in Brooklyn, I should say. Also Maury Wills, which was a base stealer, he played in Hornell, and Don Zimmer played in Hornell.
Don Zimmer, two-time MLB All-Star and 1989 NL Manager of the Year, known for his prominent base running prowess, stole home 10 times out of 63 total steals in 123 games while playing for the Hornell Dodgers.
Names for the star power that were on Hornell's team: Tommy Davis, 1956, three-time MLB All-Star, two-time NL batting title, 1962 to 1963.
Frankie Zach, 1942, MLB All-Star.
Maury Wills, 1951 through 1952, a seven-time MLB All-Star. 1962 NL Most Valuable Player. Had the most impressive Major League career of Hornell alumni, holding the Major League steals record at one time.
Thank you.